Welcome. For those of you who do not realize, this salon is being recorded and is going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel after the event. So if you want to turn off your video or whatever you would like as far as that goes. That said, welcome and thanks for joining us for our second death salon. We're the Virtual Death Doula Network, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. As such, we are an online collective of professional doulas that help companion and serve those in need. We offer respite care, vigil companioning, advanced directive planning, and other general doula services, both remotely and in person, as well as additional services specific to each doula. We also offer support to those struggling with anxiety surrounding death and grief, and we operate on a sliding scale to ensure that our services are available to everyone who needs them. The doulas at the Virtual Death Doula Network are committed to respecting clients from across our variety of backgrounds, and we recognize that death is an intensely personal experience shaped by a lifetime of experience and belief. We aim to create a space that celebrates the diversity of our doulas, clients, and their loved ones, and we endeavor to honor everyone by including perspectives from all backgrounds. For more information about who we are and what we do, please visit our website. I'm going to put that in the chat now. Just a sec. Oh, let's make it go to everybody. All right. All right. Welcome. My name is Daniel Shaw, and I'm one of the co-founders and a doula at the Virtual Death Doula Network. And I'm here with Andrea Sugar and Emily Cross and Willow Kelly. And we're going to go through some admin stuff to welcome you in, and then we'll get on to the discussions that we have planned for you today and the Q&A at the end. As we get started, I want to just make sure that everybody's able to communicate effectively. You can either interact with us by raising your hand, or more easily, if you want to use the Zoom, at the bottom there are reactions that you can use to click on to raise your hand. I'm doing that now, and you might be able to see that pop up over there. So that's one way to let us know that you want to say something or react in some way. If you want to practice that now, please go right ahead and do so.
Molly, that is great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, and use the chat. Like if anything comes up that they have issues with, feel free to drop that in the chat. As questions come up, we want to save all the questions for the end when we have our Q&A session. So feel free to put those in the chat, and we can monitor that and make sure that we have those ready to go when we get to that portion. At this point, I was hoping everybody would put their names and where they're from in the chat so we can see who we have here with us today and say hi. And also, while we're doing that, we'd like to know, why are you here? What are you, are you an end-of-life care provider, a doula? Yourself preparing for the end of life? What brings you?
And in case anyone didn't hear Daniel, because his audio went out just a little bit, you're asking, why are you here? Are you interested in learning about end-of-life practices? Are you experiencing end-of-life yourself or someone you know? Are you here just because you think this is interesting and you want to get into it?
All right, Melissa from North Carolina, Death Doula focused on pregnancy loss. Wow. What else? Louisa from Washington, want to be more active in the end-of-life community. Fantastic. Cool. Well, Estelle from Germany, end-of-life doula training. Yes, welcome back, Estelle. And Emily in the UK. Yes. All right. Fantastic. Well, before we get started, I'm going to lead us in a guided meditation. get helpful mindset for the rest of the salon. So if you have not done so yet, please find a comfortable place to sit, because today we're going to begin our salon by more fully exploring the present moment. You may allow your eyes to gently close at any point through this at this point. In fact, we've already begun this process of exploring the present moment. Every idea we have explored, every breath we have taken has led us exactly to where we are right now. You are always right now. The eternal now is the only thing that does not change. Thoughts, circumstances, and situations, even your life itself, they all pass. They all shift in and out of the moment, in and out of awareness. The eternal now is the only thing that does not change. But the present moment does not. The present moment simply is. It is all that is. It is the canvas upon which all things are written. It is the Tao which cannot be named. When you move into the now, you step back from your mind. Your thoughts slow. You find more space. You become clearer and more alive. The world becomes more vibrant, more colorful, and more interesting. You may find yourself marveling at the beauty of whatever is there for you in that moment. It is a sensation that finally you are awake and you are alive. You can become aware of this moment as effortlessly as you can become aware of your breath. Remember, the breath is a symbol. It is a pointer. Explore now that sensation to which it points. Center your awareness on everything that is right now. To do this, create a trigger. Tap your thumb to your index finger, or tap your hand to your leg, whatever feels comfortable. And when you tap, you center, reminding yourself every few seconds to come back to this moment. So let's just tap. 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 Let this be a reminder to focus. Add a word to help you as you tap. Think now, now, or peace, peace. And then continue this practice, tapping every few seconds, remembering over and over again the feeling of now. After a few moments, release the tap, but continue to focus, continue to center. Be here now, and thank you. That concludes the meditation that I wanted to take you through. I hope you're all feeling very present and grounded. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Willow, and she's going to discuss why somebody would want to work with a death doula. So Willow, if you please.
Thanks, Daniel. I also wanted to check in with Jay. I see your hand is up. Did you want to introduce yourself, or is your hand just stuck there?
I messaged him also. I PM'd him also.
Okay, well, if you want to say something, unmute and we'll get you about that. So why would you possibly want a doula? That's a question that I'm going to endeavor to answer here, and there's no way it's going to be comprehensive. I won't be able to tell you all of the things because each doula brings their own skill set and their own experiences to the work. Some of the things that are pretty common to reasons why you might want a doula. One is it's not always for the dying. Often the person who's dying is somewhat at peace with what's happening, but everyone around them is not. And sometimes what is needed is somebody to come in and sort of smooth that tension between those two states of being. It's not always for the dying. It's often for the living. It's often for other people who are associated in the caregiving, family members, people who are grieving them or having their own anticipatory grief about how this is going to unfold. Another reason why you might want a doula is this is a place where you can talk about anything and there's no taboo. A doula can hear all of it and not be emotionally swayed or feel pity or sad or all of these different feelings that somebody who deeply loves you would experience. A doula can have that little bit of distance there where they can really hold the experience and allow whatever is real and true for you to be completely safely shared, and to find the best way together to advocate for what you need and what you want. So one of the most profound things we do is we just say, you can ask us anything. And we say the same to the family and the other caregivers. You can ask me anything. And if I don't know the answer, I can probably find somebody who does, or find a resource for someone who can help you. But there is no question that is stupid. There is no question that is embarrassing or shameful. We'll talk about anything. And sometimes, depending on the group, we can even inject a little humor if that's the kind of group that needs that to break the tension. We can also just hold that peaceful, quiet space. One of the things that we're all trained to do through the program that we did was provide unconditional positive regard. And it is so much easier for a doula to provide that than it often is for the friends and family, because it's complicated relationships. And with a doula, it's not complicated. We come in and we are holding the space, and we can hold that positive regard, knowing that sure, the person probably has dysfunctional behavior, we all do, but we can have that, again, that level of distance where we can provide something that people that are very close often cannot provide emotionally. We also have conversations about what it means to have a good death, and then we do everything in our power to make sure that people can have that good death experience. And each person is going to have a different good death experience. And that's another part of being a doula, is just having that flexibility to say, what is it you desire? What do you want? What would be a good death for you? And how can we make this happen together? And some doulas advocate medically for people, or advocate for their wishes to be met, or have the conversations or facilitate a conversation between parties around some of these issues that might be really sensitive. We also help people prepare who are in perfectly good health. So other people who want to have a good death and who are not at death's door, but maybe their parents are and they're thinking about their own mortality, or maybe they're just thinking that their particular job has some, dangers to it that they might want to prepare for, or they have children and they just want to make sure if some big accident happened, that it wouldn't be a random fall of the dice about what happened to them and their loved ones. So doulas also help plan. We help figure out what kind of paperwork you need, where you live, what the different laws are. We help you find all of the resources that you need to plan a good death. We do care coordination, advocacy, and organization. So often a lot of what we do is making sure that everybody who is on the care team has all of the same information, and that everybody is aware when there's a medication change, when there's a care change, when there's a schedule change, when there's a dietary change. So a doula is someone that can make sure that those little threads that can so easily be dropped in the chaos of all that is up for people when someone is dying, the doula can make sure that those little threads stay connected, and it can make all the difference. We also provide terminal agitation support and nearing death awareness support. In other words, if people begin to have hallucinations, I don't even like to call them hallucinations. I like to say that they're experiencing reality differently. I don't know what it is. I don't understand that mystery that happens to people when they're dying, but it's a mystery and it's amazing. And a doula can often step in there and help those moments not go sideways, where the family tries to say, no, no, you're crazy. We're not back then. This is now, you know, trying to pull them out of that experience, where a doula can say, let's all go with them into this experience and find out what is important to them that they're trying to have for this peaceful death. So doulas have that capacity to step in and not be emotionally swayed and not have all of that history there, to be able to say, I think something's happening here. We can pay attention and we can get in this with them. We can create a connection in a place where people often don't know how. And that is profoundly valuable. As Daniel said earlier, we can help with respite care. We can do that by watching people with a cell phone number and letting people know if there's any kind of a change. There's ways that we can provide respite for caregivers, for family, for even the dying themselves when they need a break, because sometimes the emotional quality of all of their friends and family being in there becomes emotional labor for them. And they still want someone with them, but they just don't want so much heavy emotional weight in the room. So we can provide that sort of emotional respite for people as well. We are also taught through our course that all of us took through the University of Vermont, and I assume this is probably true of other doula trainings, part of our homework was during each module to create a list of resources for different categories of end-of-life care. So we were able to do this, and we got national, state, and local organizations. So we have resources for things such as memory care, grief support, grieving children, complementary care providers that don't give medical treatments, but give other types of comfort care, funerals and body disposition information, protective care, in other words, to make sure that no one's being abused in a situation, ethics, hospice information, palliative care information. There's a whole lot of resources that we've gathered as part of our training. So when someone comes to us and says, my mother is towards end of life and she has Alzheimer's or dementia, we can say, we know about some memory care facilities. We know about music and memory resources, and we can provide things that people may not be able to find in that sea of the internet, which can be very overwhelming when you're trying to figure things out. Finally, I would just reiterate that different doulas have different types of specialties and services, and I'm just going to name a few. I am an officiant and a celebrant. I also have my badge for home funeral and green burial guidance. I also do customized trances, meditations, and I'm a court-trained mediator, so I can jump in and help with some of that stuff, and legacy projects. Emily, who is one of the co-founders of our network, does intuitive drawing, painting, collage, sculpture, all kinds of artistic expressions and endeavors. And music, both performing for clients, singing with clients, selecting appropriate music for clients. And she also does meditation and mindful practices. Andrea is a Reiki master, and she does life coaching on all of these different levels. Daniel does all of these doula services, plus specializes in plant ceremonies. So you'll find different doulas just have different kinds of things that are their passion that they bring to the table. But one of the best things is you've got somebody who is not emotionally involved in such a way that it is counterproductive, and you have someone who has a lot of resources. Those are the two fundamental skills I feel like we provide. Does anybody want to add to that? Any of you other lovely doulas? I'll pass it back to Daniel otherwise.
Yeah, Willa, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that. That was very well done. Thank you. I think unless anybody does have something to say, I'm going to hand it on over to Andrea now, who's going to talk a little bit about types of grief and yeah. So at this point, Andrea, if you would like, take us through some grief.
I am Andrea Sugar. I am CEO, co-founder, and a death doula at the Virtual Death Doula Network. I'm very grateful that you've all joined us here today. I'm going to start with what we most know as the most basic common model of grief. Many of you may have heard of this. It's the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. They are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. However, these stages, they're not linear, and nor does everyone go through every single one of them. In fact, we would go as far as to say there really are no stages. Grief is much more of a spiral. And these stages, they can happen at any time, they can happen simultaneously, or they can not happen at all. And one of the things we like to caution people when they're looking at these stages is to not expect that one should go through any of these stages, because there is no incorrect way to grieve. I want to get into a type of grief that's not talked about very frequently, which is called anticipatory grief. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of this. If you have, maybe raise your hand, either physically or virtually. But anticipatory grief is the process of grieving all of the losses associated with an illness or the process of dying. So this affects both the person who is at the end of life, who is dying, as well as their loved ones, friends, and anyone around them. So anticipatory grief is grieving the loss of normal function, both physical and mental, for both the dying and their loved ones. So dementia is a really good example of something that can cause anticipatory grief for both those suffering from it and their loved ones. Anticipatory grief is grieving the loss of normal life and interactions, the loss of those roles that people hold, such as provider, parent, partner, all of those things. It's the realization and the loss of goals and dreams, bucket list items that are simply no longer options. It's the loss of life that once was. And it's also the loss of freedom, privacy, and autonomy, which can really be pretty powerful for someone at the end of life. And so when I think about anticipatory grief, I have a quote that's very near and dear to me by Paulo Coelho, and it says, "Tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself." Because while grief is hard and we do suffer, it is healthy and it is natural, and it will move. That being said, grief can really affect us profoundly. And there is something called grief fog. And grief fog is how grief affects our brain to the extent that it literally impairs our memory function and our ability and capacity to concentrate and multitask, to do the normal day-to-day tasks that we can go through without thinking. But when someone's in the throes of grief and experiencing grief fog, doing something as simple as opening the mail can seem impossible. And I just want to assure everyone that this is totally normal. It's normal to not be able to function normally while experiencing grief, because there are a lot of emotions that go on. And I just urge people to be really tender with yourself and easy with yourself. And if you find that you have a day where everything's getting tripped up, just take a moment, pause, and forgive yourself the best you can, because it is absolutely part of the grief process. Another type of grief that's important to mention is complicated grief. And this is when people become stuck in grief for a very long period of time without any resolution or improvement. This can look very similar to depression, but depression is caused by a chemical imbalance, while complicated grief is situational in nature and does not respond to antidepressant medication. Feelings of emptiness and despair are part of complicated grief, and one can even become completely paralyzed with this emptiness and despair and inability to get up off the couch, to move, to get out from under your blanket. So normal grief has ups and downs, while complicated grief has no ups. And if you know someone or you find yourself experiencing this, please reach out. And we have support, but we also recommend reaching out to a therapist sometimes to help work through the differences, to try to find your way through so you can continue to move with your So while there's all these challenges with grief, there are some things that can be very helpful, some support fundamentals. And Emily's going to touch on this as well. But one of the big things is that while we can't fix grief, we can be present for it. We can companion. Being with a person who's grieving so they're not alone, sitting quietly and being present can be an enormous help. Be prepared to be uncomfortable and be okay with not being able to fix things. That can often be the real challenge, because when you love someone so much and you see them suffering and hurting, you just want to take it away and you just want to fix it. And that's not something that can happen with grief. What you can do is encourage self-care, proper eating, proper sleeping. If it seems someone's having a hard time with that, ask them what they need and help them make a list. And if it's, gosh, I'm having such a hard time eating, then maybe say, you know what, I'm just going to drop off a meal every day. No need to respond, or a text every day that says, hey, I'm thinking of you. I'm here. You don't have to respond. It's also okay to say to someone, if you don't know what to say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you and I love you. And you can say, it must be hard to come to terms with all of this. May I just sit with you for a while? There are also some things that they're better not to do with grief, although they do seem intuitive, because again, we all have this nature where we just want to fix things for people. So we do suggest that cliches and platitudes are avoided, such as they're in a better place now. It comes from a good meaning, but it's not very soothing. We recommend not communicating shoulds or projecting any kind of timeline for someone who's grieving, as well as not overlaying your own experience. It's valuable to draw from your experience, but not make it about you and your own experience, as well as not inserting personal religious or spiritual beliefs. And again, resisting the urge to fix. And then the last part of grief that I want to touch on is a challenging one, but one that people experience pretty frequently. And this is called challenging or unexpected grief. And an example of this would be grieving the loss of a parent with whom you had a dysfunctional relationship, a distant relationship, a hard relationship, or maybe no relationship at all. This kind of grieving, it's common for people to mourn the death of a parent with whom they didn't have a strong relationship, to confront an additional layer of complexity with their grief, because they are really mourning two separate losses. There's mourning the loss of the actual parent, and then there's the finality of no longer being able to repair a relationship that maybe you wished could have been different. And that is very different from grieving the loss of a person themselves. And the challenge with these is that it makes it more difficult to move towards what is called integrated grief, which is the kind of grief that never goes away, because grief, it doesn't go away, but it doesn't dominate the person's life forever. And we will have an article that's a really good resource for this that we'll include in our follow-up email, as well as put in the chat. And in summary, I want to reiterate the importance of allowing oneself to grieve however feels right to the individual at the time. There is no incorrect way to grieve, and there's no timeline. However, grief is something we learn to move through with and over time. Grief doesn't go away, it changes and it evolves. Even when one feels stuck, grief is still moving and is transitory like any other emotions. It is okay to ask for help and support at any time, particularly for the times when one feels paralyzed or stuck or confused by their grief. And we at the Virtual Death Doula Network offer grief support as well as resources if someone does require assistance that's beyond our scope. We are here to support you. Please feel free to ask any questions. We're going to put the link to our support services in the chat for anyone who would like more information, and you can find this on your site as well.
All right, thank you, Andrea. That was great. And now Emily will take us through some of the practices that we can do to help with the anxiety and some of the challenging emotions that come up as we're processing grief. So thank you, Andrea. Emily?
All right, so as we were learning, grief is nonlinear and it's non-conforming to these neat explanations that we may read in books or on the internet. It can be all consuming, sometimes fleeting, sometimes confusing, sometimes distressing, a whole multitude of emotions, which might hang around for a while and rapidly change. So we don't know how grief will affect us, but one thing that a lot of people experience is anxiety. And one sort of flavor of grief, I guess I'll call it, that tends to breed anxiety is especially anticipatory grief or preparatory grief, as Andrea was talking about. It's defined as cognitive, emotional, and spiritual responses to the understanding that one has a life-limiting disease, that death is approaching, basically. And we'll also loop in that this type of grief can occur in relation to another person. So a loved one or a family member, not necessarily only for one's own death. So people may grieve for the loss of life itself, the loss of small pleasures like walking their dog or having a coffee, a familiar routine. They may also grieve for what the loss of their life means to those around them, so to their children, their spouse, friends, anyone that they're in contact with and have good relationships with. And this grief is frequently confused with depression or even anxiety disorders. A lot of the times because the person experiencing this type of grief doesn't feel free and open to express and talk to others about what they're experiencing. And so it's kind of miscategorized and mistreated. So some tools we can use to assist one in opening up and therefore helping to relieve some anxiety is to acknowledge the person's emotions. You can say something like, I see that you're sad, mad, etc., just what you're observing. Just simply by seeing the person, that can be a tremendous relief to someone who is grieving. Just to see that you've noticed that they're feeling that way. It can be a doorway to communication. You can empathize by saying, I know this is hard for you. I know this is difficult. I know you're struggling. If they've opened up to you in that way, just again, by validating that and being there with them, very helpful. Explore the person's concerns with some questions, tactfully, sensitively. Something like, what concerns do you have about how your loved ones will cope after you're gone? Validate by reminding a person that their grief is completely okay and normal and fluid, changing, all of that. Help a person recall by celebrating the life they have lived and recognize their tasks that they would like to complete. You can even assist them in completing these tasks. That can help relieve some anxiety by crossing things off lists. Discussing practical concerns may also help to alleviate some anxiety. Managing symptoms, managing paperwork, reconciling differences with family members, all these things, if you feel comfortable with a loved one, can help alleviate this anxiety. And of course, it's different for every person, but these are just suggestions. So more broadly, grief can involve bouts of sleepless nights, insomnia, worrying, circular thinking, obsessive thinking, lack of the ability to nurture oneself, being spread thin, and just not being the person that they once were or perceive themselves to be. So one of the tools we can use for coping with this type of anxiety, which comes along with exhaustion of both body and mind, is calming the nervous system with some breathing exercises. So we can pair these exercises with mindfulness, which is limiting one's focus to one simple thing or task. And that's putting it very shortly, but I'm going to link some explanations for breathing exercises. But to give you one example of a breathing exercise, I will describe box breathing, which is a very common technique that people use to calm the central nervous system. So box breathing is also referred to as square breathing. If you read those terms, those are interchangeable. It's a deep breathing technique that can help you slow down your breathing And it works by distracting your mind as you count to 4, calming your nervous system, decreasing stress in your body in a physical way. So how you do box breathing is you breathe in and count to 4, hold your breath and count to 4, exhale for 4, and then rest for 4. So it's a box of 4s essentially. And we can try it right now. So inhale for 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Slowly exhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then rest for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this can be repeated as many times as a person wants to. It's a very, very simple and very effective tool for breathing. Okay. Now, mindfulness is a really broad term, and I'll also link some examples of mindfulness activities. But just to give one example of a mindfulness activity, I will explain one of my favorite types of mindfulness activities. It's called deep seeing, deep S-E-E-I-N-G. So how you do this is you choose an object to focus your whole attention to for a period of time. So you can choose any time, but usually just a couple minutes is really effective. Use your sense of sight to intimately engage with this item. So you'll pick an item, you'll see it, you'll notice everything about it. Notice the color, the shape, the size, the texture. Gently observe the object and let any thoughts outside of the world of this object fade away into the background. So it's just hyper focus, intense focus on an object and deep seeing. This also tends to bring about feelings of gratitude, wonder, curiosity about the object and also about the world as a whole. That's just my personal experience with it. One other thing I wanted to note about this type of grief and grief in general is it can bring about feelings of inadequacy and fear and unease and comparison with others. And anxiety, which stems from this aspect of grief, may benefit from a backing away from something that we all use and love, which is social media. A backing away is just kind of a suggestion, but really one can just have a look at why one is engaging with social media and what they're getting out of different aspects of social media. For instance, if someone is engaging with social media and paying attention and thinking, wow, I'm really just comparing my life to these people and romanticizing other lives. We've all done it before. It can slip into a very unhealthy realm, especially if we're not in a great place in the start of your social media journey. So if feelings of inadequacy and envy are stemming from the usage of the social media, it might help to temporarily pause social media or more mindfully engage with social media. And I will put some kind of helpful resources into our follow-up email, but that's just one suggestion. And while you're not on social media, you could journal or draw. These creative processes can be really nourishing, especially if they're done without self-judgment and no judgment about the outcome, not worrying about if the writing is good or bad or the drawing is good or bad, just doing it for doing its sake, doing it for the joy of doing it, just having an exercise where you put your mind to it for a couple minutes. Journaling can also be helpful in the ritual of making lists. This could help to ease anxiety just by list making, writing out worries, writing letters that you'll never send, but just getting thoughts out onto the page. There's something I really love from a book called The Artist's Handbook. It's called Morning Pages. And it's just stream of consciousness writing for 3 pages. So during those 3 pages, you just say literally anything that enters your mind onto the page. And it's a really deeply, it will change your life. I mean, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but it really is a cool thing to do. And the intention isn't to share it with anybody or have it be good or anything. It's just to have your feelings getting out there or your list or whatever you want to do. Also, some ideas for alleviating anxiety, and this is from person to person, but oftentimes engaging with nature and natural objects is very healing and very nourishing for people. So going out into a park or just putting your feet on a patch of grass can be just really, really good for you. Sharing feelings and experiences with others can also be deeply healing activities during times of grief. Connecting with a wider network of support may be of interest. And in that case, I'd like to bring up our own Facebook group, which Andrea also brought up. It's just called Grief and Anxiety Support with the Virtual Death Doula Network, which we will send you information about, I'm sure. This is a place to come and feel supported in a safe and non-judgmental space. Asking for help or a sounding board may feel uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it may open up a whole world of peace and healing. So that's all I have for you. It's a really broad topic, and we'll do a Q&A later. So if you have any questions about whatever I said, please feel free to ask later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. That was great. Yeah, and thank everybody for listening so far. We're going to go into a little interactive section now to lighten things up a bit. I have with me Morbid Curiosity, a game about death, and it's a set of cards that just provides questions and prompts to get people talking topics about death and have a little fun in the process. So at this point, I'm going to put people into breakout rooms and give you a couple of questions to mull over and discuss for a couple minutes, and then we'll bring you back and say a few words about the experience. At this point, if you do not want to participate, please raise your hand either virtually in person and let me know, and you'll get to stay in the main room with us. But if not, if you're okay with it, just I'm gonna give you a minute now to voice your opinion, and then I'm going to put you in a breakout room. The questions that we have for you today coming from this are in the chat now. Let's see, what has your family taught you about death? And was there anything you think of as screwed up or misguided? And who doesn't love a good eulogy? Start yours today by sharing one piece of advice for those left behind. And so that's sort of, start mulling that over, because at this point I'm going to set you out and we're going to put, or as Andrea said, please feel free to jot down your answers in the chat also, if that makes more sense. But I'm going to set you out in just two-person on a room for like 4 or 5 minutes and then pull you back in. And that being said, let's do this. So we're breakout rooms. All right. Enjoy, and we will see you. Oh, well, let me do this all at once.
And if anybody has any questions or you're not sure where the questions we're talking about are, please don't hesitate to ask. You will find them in the chat.
All right. And I need to do the last one. There we are. It looks like one person has not gone, Jeannie has not gone into room 3. Do one of us want to join Luis Dabo in room 3?
Sure, I will. Put me on.
I'm going to send you over there real quick then.
Send me there.
All right, and Emily is in room 1 for some reason. It says with Willow, let's move her back to main session. I accidentally bumped her out, it looks like. So let me pull her back. Emily, sorry about that. I moved you to a room accidentally, but we've got people broken out into to a room right now.
What is going on?
Sorry about that.
I started a timer, Daniel, for 2 minutes.
Thank you.
So you can notify people.
Yep, I see the broadcast message to all, so we will
That's it.
do that. I guess just cue me when like 4 minutes or whatever is, and I'll send the message. And then
Are you aware that Jeannie's in this room?
yes,
Mhm.
she
Yeah.
has. I've
She stayed
Jeannie,
with us.
she stayed
Okay,
with us. Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I
I asked
just-
her to. Right, yeah. And so Andrea went to room 3 with the other person there instead.
Oh, great. Okay,
Yeah,
Cool.
because we saw that, and so that's, of course, that's fine. So
perfect.
said, I will take that. And I said, yay, cool.
Yay, cool.
Well, I didn't. I thought so. I didn't say. But nice so that the one person is not there on their lonesome.
Yeah.
Neat breakout rooms. Nice. It's a lot of material that we go through, like a lot.
Yeah, it is.
I was thinking about it as I was, standing here. I'm like, this is, it's a lot.
It's good to have the follow-up email. I like that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, we have to with this, with everything that we've talked about today. It would be very difficult. It would be unfair to not follow up with resources and everything.
Definitely.
So you can get ready to message everybody that they're about halfway through their time.
We'll do that. I will do that. Here, about halfway. Broadcast done. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I will tell you when to call them back here. In the meantime, I'm really curious if you all have answers to those questions you want to share.
Yeah, actually, my family.
I think my piece of advice for people left behind is don't try so hard to fit in.
Such
Stand
good
out,
advice.
be yourself, like just be who you are, love what you love, do what you do. Just don't be ashamed
Don't
of
sweat
it.
it.
Don't
Yeah,
hold back.
Yep.
yeah. What are we talking about? Well, the first one, what my family taught me about death was not helpful. Talk about screwed up and misguided. I just think back to my experiences growing up, and it was not talked about, and like even with my mom got cancer and died when I was in high school, and it was not really discussed or anything like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it just happened.
That's misguided.
Yeah,
That's all
well,
screwed
it
up.
was, my father, my father just didn't know, he didn't have the emotional bandwidth to be able to
Sure.
tend to his wife and
Take
his
that
kids.
on. Yeah. That's totally understandable.
Yeah, well, I mean, we needed it, like, we would have greatly benefited from a doula, but I don't even know if end of life doulas were a thing yet at that point. That was a while ago. And I'm sure there were, but probably far fewer than they have, than
What about you, Emily?
Gosh, to be honest, my family didn't really talk about death at all, and there wasn't much death to be talked about. But I remember my uncle actually drove himself off of a cliff in a semi truck, and death was very hidden, and emotions were hidden, and that was what was prioritized, hiding of emotions. So
Wow.
again, kind
Yeah.
of similar to Daniel, it's just
Yeah.
not helpful.
Yeah, it was very much hiding that emotions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think they're protecting them, but you're not. Like your kids are so intuitive too. Like they just get
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, and I did. And
Oh, time to
Okay.
call them back.
Okay, I'll send them. Okay, wrapping up. Broadcast, close all rooms. All right. All right, 60 seconds, 56, 55. I guess we'll start seeing
Sometimes
people coming
come
back.
back sooner. Some
Yeah.
people wait till the very end.
Room 2 and room 4 are still going, but oh, no, they're coming back too. All right. And this is where we want to just ask folks for 3 words to, this is what we discussed, I think, having that part to, yeah. Carmen and Estelle are,
Yeah, they're chatting it up.
they
They're
are.
I love it when that happens. There's always at least one group.
So when Carmen and Estelle come back, we're going to ask everybody to share 3 words from their experience with this. And you can either raise your hand and unmute yourself and share it verbally, or you can put it in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with, or no need to do any of it.
Yeah, and we're all back now, actually. So we'll just, would you like to say that again, Andrea?
Yeah, so now that everyone's back, thank you for joining us in that interactive activity. So now we'd like to ask people to give us 3 words about this experience, and you are welcome to raise your hand and speak the words. You can unmute yourself, or if you want to just put them in the chat, if that's more comfortable, you're welcome to do that, or you can skip it. Thank you, Emily.
Grateful and not alone, yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic.
I don't know if everybody can see the responses that were
Yeah, I
written.
should read it. Yeah, I didn't know if I'm looking at them and not even thinking. Yeah, so far Emily is, or go back. Emily has started off with grateful and not alone. Molly, very similar upbringing. We ran into some of that on our stuff too. Louisa, happy, included, yay. That was her yay, not mine, but I say yay also. Andrea, encouraged and open and safe. Mel, open, welcoming, insightful, lovely. I'm so glad that yay. That was my yay. At this, oh, yay, death positivity. Absolutely. Thank you, Willow, for sure. Great. Hopeful, look after the kids. Estelle, thank you.
And I'd like to say something to Willow's comment, you know, yay, death positivity. That is something that can make people uncomfortable, but death isn't good or bad. Death can just be very hard. So it is absolutely okay to find joy in grief, to find joy in the dying process. And when someone is dying, it is okay to have positive, uplifted feelings in the midst of all of this. And I think that's just, thank you, Willow, for bringing that up. It's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, emotions run the gamut during death and dying and can include positive emotions. And it's if that happens, that's just your emotions at that time. And that's completely okay. Yeah, thank you. I think this concludes the formal presentation and the interactive stuff. At this point, we're moving into question and answer. So if you've got any questions, throw them this way. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask them out loud, or you can put them in the chat. We are at your disposal.
And maybe while people are gathering their questions, I'm going to touch back just once again on the feeling joy or feeling good during a period of grieving or mourning or while someone's dying. This can actually feel really scary for people. Like it can make people feel bad or even guilty that they're feeling good. And it's really important to know there is nothing wrong with feeling good. In fact, you should feel good. You are living life, and this life is meant for joy, even amidst the challenging, hard parts. So when you find those little bits of joy, welcome them. As Mary Oliver, who's one of my favorite poetesses, says, joy is not meant to be a crumb. So I encourage you to let it in whenever you can, even in the hardest parts.
I love that, Andrea. And I also think of death positivity as creating a culture that's willing to talk about death.
Yeah.
Instead of making it a taboo or something we don't discuss. To me, death positivity is like, let's talk about it. Let's bring it in the room. Let's make it ours. Let's make it the best we can make it be.
And everyone, by being here today, this is a very much a death positivity event, and you're here talking about death and dying and grieving, and that's fantastic. And more of this, more of this is good. More of this is very good.
I just wanted to ask too that if you have questions that are not specifically related to what we've talked about, if you have questions about our work or wanting to know doula stories or anything like that, questions about the content, please feel free to hit us up.
Yeah, anything, please, anything.
Estelle, do you want to go ahead? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what you were saying, Andrea, about the different grief that, sorry, can you just leave the room? Thank you. My kids are here. Just give me a second, please.
I'll put this back.
Okay, thank you. Like I don't know if that grief is part of one of the category that you haven't talked about, but I've been experiencing something with a close family, family, and it's the non-authorized grief. And when I said that, I think about the survivors. I have friends, two young kids from the same family. They were cousins. They were in a car accident, and one died and not the other one. And this girl now has to live with the grief of losing her cousin, but also she is not allowed, or she doesn't authorize herself to grieve for what she lost because she was really injured in the accident, but she's not dead. And she's kind of not allowing herself to grieve for what she's lost because the other one is dead. And I don't know if it's part of one of the category you haven't mentioned, or is where could we say it's a complicated grief?
It is, and it also involves survivor guilt, which is something that is very common when people are involved in something and someone that they love does not make it and they're still alive and they wonder, why me? Why am I still here and they're not? Or should it have been me? Or all of those things. So they're really dealing with the guilt of still being alive while the other person wasn't, which is totally normal and natural. Willow, do you have something to add? I see you over there.
I was just going to say that there's also, we didn't talk much about this complex grief where more than one grief is happening at the same time. And I would agree with Andrea. I was going to say the same thing. Survivor's guilt is very specific, and it is really common to people who've survived accidents when other people have died. And it is a very complicated emotional landscape because there's also trauma involved. They were in an accident. They actually survived a traumatic event, and that has its whole impact on them. And then having that whole other issue of the loss of the people who died, and then the why me questions, it is super complicated. But they can also be experiencing complex grief because if they were injured, they're dealing with trying to recover from their injuries, which is also its own kind of grief when your body doesn't do what it's supposed to do, what you know it can do, and it's letting you down and it's hurting. That can really bring up such frustration, anger, fear. Is it going to get better? How much better is it going to get? There's just so much involved in a situation like that where they've experienced a trauma and survived and been injured. It's so complicated.
And so we would probably suggest reaching out or having them reach out to a therapist so that they can start to parse some of these things apart and work through each part of it so they can then forgive themselves. Because that's what it will take. She'll have to forgive herself, even though she didn't do anything wrong. The psyche is really caught up on blame a lot of the time.
I wanted to drop back into something that Andrea had said about enjoying the experience of dying. And this seems so strange to me, but I actually have two friends, very close friends right now, who are facing life-limiting diseases. Most likely going to die from them in the next handful of years. And both of them feel really grateful. They feel like they're more alive than they've ever been, that things are more precious than they've ever been. They're kind of done. They've had full lives, or they've had very challenging lives. They just feel like they're done. And Two of them have met with me and said, I don't know how to manage this with my family because they're not okay. They are not fine. And they think that I'm in denial or I'm shutting it off. And I'm really just, I'm good. And I think it does come as a shock when people are good with it, when people are really okay with it. And it's, I think, more common than I realized. I took care of a guy over on the other side of the mountain. And the first day that I met him, his daughter she was very sweet. She met me outside. She told me her father was a little bit wild and she hoped I wouldn't get offended by him. And I thought it's pretty hard to offend me, but let's go on in. So I went in to meet him and we had a great conversation and he just threw his arms up in the air and he goes, oh, yay, somebody to help me to have fun while I'm dying. And I just started cracking up. She looked mortified. And when I followed her outside, she apologized. And I said, oh, no, me and your dad are going to get along just fine. It's really funny. And I do see that there is a question here from Louisa saying, doing doula service virtually seems simple, not easy. How has that worked for anyone who's done it? So who's done some virtual doula-ing?
Yeah, and I responded in the
Andrea.
chat to her just about that. And it's so far the virtual doula work that we've done so far has involved stuff like sort of logistical stuff that we're able to help with, like helping advance directives. It's just something relatively easy to do from wherever you're at, and companioning and stuff. Like one of the big challenges we still have is connecting with clients still. So that's, that's sort of the flip side. There's a lot of the work that works. It lends itself, certain things lend themselves better to virtual doulaing than others, to be sure. And we're still sort of figuring out the best practices as far as that goes, I would say.
I will say that we do a lot of grief, death, and anxiety support virtually.
Yeah.
I do it. We do it almost daily.
A lot.
And that works really, really well. And a lot of times what I'm finding is that I will have a client that will come to me for the grief and death support, anxiety support. They have a dying family member. Maybe the dying family member isn't quite sure about what a doula is. Why would they want a doula? Do they want a doula? But they're starting to open to it. So I have a client that I've just started working with whose grandma is 97, but she still drives. She still does a lot of things, but she's rounding the corner. And we've started talking about having a FaceTime chat once a week, just as a companion, and not as anything, not as healthcare, not as someone who's going to tell her what to do, but just to be there, especially to give her granddaughter a break when she needs a little bit of rest, or to get a shower, and just to make sure grandma's going to be okay during that time. So we are finding virtually that works out very, very well, particularly if people already have technology and if they have someone who can assist them in utilizing that technology if they're not tech savvy.
One of the things I do the most virtually is resource sharing. I'm pointing people all the time to all kinds of different resources that they're looking for. I see that Mel chimed in. I recently did some virtual doulaing for a client who had a miscarriage across the country. It has its limitations for sure, but we managed to get her what she needed.
Wonderful.
That's great, Mel.
Wonderful.
Wow. Yeah, doing that from across the country, that's something.
There's also, I could see potential for assisting with legacy projects as well over the internet. I mean, it would have to be slightly unconventional, but if they needed to have something physical, you could help connect at least with people in their area and compile, resources lists, and also just an outline of things that a person that is in person can then go through. But I think that could be a possibility to help with legacy projects. They create videos, little online games, recipe books, whatever is their idea.
Slideshows are great to create virtually.
Slideshows, yeah, exactly.
And one last thing also that I've had some requests for, and I think we'll be putting together at some point, is an online celebration of life. So some people that are in the dying process don't necessarily want a funeral or don't just want a funeral, they would like something they're involved in that they can celebrate and they can be with their loved ones and their family members in a joyful way again, even though there's still a piece that's sad. There, it's bittersweet. There can still be some joy, and that's something that we can absolutely set up virtually very easily. We can create a Zoom room and we have the family members in, we can play music, we can do slideshows, whatever it is that the person wants to create this celebration. And that's something that is very successful virtually.
Right, and we've identified a lot, like we've gone through and sort of identified these different things that we can do potentially, and have broken those out on our website basically as potential services that you could, do with us. So that's, and yeah, it's good to hear all the different,
And
all these
particularly,
different things that we've got going on as far as virtual doula services.
yes, and particularly with COVID, because people are separate right now, doing these online celebrations or even online gatherings just to be together, just to connect. In fact, I have a client who really likes, they're a young client, they're 24, and they love the Morbid Curiosity deck. So we are going to set up a time to play this game with her family, who is struggling a little bit more with her living/dying than she is. So we're gonna play this game online on Zoom so that we can create some conversations that can begin some healing and some opening and some comfort for everyone.
Any more questions? All right.
We'll be sending out a follow-up newsletter for everyone with resources and the link to this that you can watch on our YouTube channel if you wish to view it again or share it with anyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Willow, Andrea, Emily, of course, for sharing all this stuff with the day, and everybody for joining us. Yeah, it's been a real honor to be here talking to you about grief and death and dying. These can be challenging topics, and we've got tremendous gratitude that you've chosen to spend this time with us today. Yeah, and again, we're going to be sending out a follow-up email with resources and topics, and this is going on the YouTube channel. We are here to support and encourage you to reach out with any other questions that you may have that you might not have gotten to in this, but thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Estelle.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.